The Threnn called it an assessment engagement. Humanity called it, eventually, the day the sky turned black. It began with a transmission that arrived at 0300 hours Geneva time, addressed not to a person but to a designation, Sol System, Tier 3 provisional species. No greeting, no negotiation, just a notice, written in the clipped, procedural language of an institution that had been classifying species for longer than humans had been writing things down. The Threnn Concord, it said, required all provisional species seeking permanent trade tier classification to undergo a mandatory live combat assessment, conducted under Concord observation, against a Concord assessment squadron of standard configuration. The purpose, the message explained with bureaucratic blandness, was to establish an accurate combat capability, rating for tariff and protection treaty purposes. Humanity's current rating, it noted almost as an afterthought, was unverified, presumed negligible. 3 ships would arrive in 11 weeks. Humanity could field whatever it wished against them. The engagement would proceed under standard non-lethal containment fields. Ships disabled, not destroyed. Crews unharmed regardless of outcome. A civilized formality, the Threnn insisted. Nothing personal. Admiral Trecheran, the Concord officer who would command the assessment squadron, gave one additional statement to the press pool that had gathered the data, translated, and replayed 11,000 times across Earth within a day. He said it without malice, which somehow made it worse. We do not expect this to take long. Most provisional species find the experience instructive. 11 weeks, 3 ships, a rating that already presumed the answer. Secretary of Earth Defense Coordination Imani Reyes. No relation to any other Reyes, just a common name and an unhelpful coincidence. Read the transcript twice in her office in Brussels, then called an emergency session of the Joint Fleet Command. The room that gathered 20 minutes later held 4 admirals, the chiefs of every regional space defense authority, and exactly 1 civilian engineer who had not been invited and had shown up anyway, because she'd heard the broadcast on her commute and turned her car around. Dr. Maya Okonkwo was 36 years old, head of a 14-person centrifusion lab that the Joint Fleet Budget Office reviewed every year and almost funded every year. She had spent a decade building distributed sensor networks nobody asked for, arguing in increasingly frustrated memos that the future of small craft warfare wasn't bigger ships. It was more ships, talking to each other faster than any human commander could think. The memos went into a folder. The folder went nowhere. She stood at the back of the room until General Aldrich Voss, commander of Earth's combined fleet, finished outlining the obvious problem. Humanity's largest active warship, the Resolute, was 800 meters of competent 21st century engineering. Threnn assessment cruisers, based on a handful of trade route sightings humanity had logged, ran closer to 2 kilometers, with shielding and weapon yields nobody in the room could confidently estimate because nobody had ever survived close enough to measure them. Realistically, Voss said, we field everything we have and we lose. The only question is how badly, and what that costs us at the negotiating table afterward. That's wrong, Maya said. Every head turned. She hadn't meant to say it that loud. Voss didn't recognize her. And you are Dr. Okonkwo, Sensor Fusion Lab, Geneva campus. She walked in front of the room before anyone could stop her because she had spent 10 years being polite about this, and politeness had gotten her nothing. You're thinking about this as a ship problem. It's not a ship problem. It's a counting problem. She pulled up the only thing she brought, a tablet with a decade of unread proposals on it, and threw the core diagram onto the briefing screen. A swarm topology. Hundreds of small nodes, each one simple, each one cheap, each one talking to every other node in real time, forming a single distributed intelligence that no individual unit needed to be smart enough to hold alone. Threnn doctrine, what little we've observed, is built around capital ships with centralized targeting. One brain, very smart, controlling very few, very expensive bodies. That's efficient against another capital ship. It's a liability against something built the opposite way. Voss folded his arms. You're proposing what exactly? I'm proposing we stop trying to outship them, Maya said. We can't. We've never been able to. But we can outnumber them by 4 orders of magnitude if we build small, cheap, and coordinated instead of large, expensive, and singular. Drones, not one flagship. 40,000 of them. The room was quiet the way rooms get quiet when an idea is either insane or the only one left worth trying. 11 weeks, said Admiral Petra Lindqvist, the only one in the room who hadn't spoken yet, and the only one who'd actually read Maya's memos before today. Can you build a coordination architecture that doesn't collapse into chaos at that scale in 11 weeks? Maya thought about 10 years of folders nobody opened. I've had longer than 11 weeks to think about it. I just never had a deadline that made anyone listen. Lindqvist looked at Voss. Voss looked at the diagram for a long moment, the kind of look a man gives an idea he hates and can't disprove. You have a budget, he said finally, and you have 11 weeks. Don't waste either. They called it the Hornet Directive internally, because Maya's lead fabrication engineer, a sharp-tongued Brazilian named Rafael Dutra, said on day 3 that the whole plan amounted to making God's angriest insect and mailing it to a battleship, and the name stuck before anyone could stop it. The problem was never the drones themselves. A drone airframe, fast, expendable, carrying a single modest plasma lance and a sensor suite a tenth the size of anything a capital ship carried, was something humanity already knew how to mass produce. Civilian shipyards in 3 countries retooled within 2 weeks, building hulls by the thousand on lines that used to make orbital cargo haulers. The problem was the coordination. 40,000 individually stupid machines needed to behave collectively like one terrifyingly smart one. Without a central command ship, the Threnn could simply target and decapitate the whole swarm in a single shot. Maya's answer, refined across 6 brutal weeks of failed simulations, was a mesh authority structure with no single point of failure. Every drone could see, through every other drone, the entire battle space in real time. Every drone could independently calculate firing solutions. If the Concord destroyed 1,000 of them in a single pass, the remaining 39,000 would simply reroute around the gap, like water closing over a stone, in under 400 milliseconds. Week 4 nearly broke the project. In Live-Fire Simulation 81, the swarm's collective targeting solution overloaded its own communication mesh, trying to deconflict 40,000 simultaneous firing calculations, and the entire formation ceased for 11 full seconds, an eternity in combat, before correcting. 11 seconds against a Threnn cruiser was a death sentence. Raphael found Maya in the simulation bay at 2 a.m., staring at the failure log instead of going home. "We're not going to make it," he said, not unkindly. It was just a fact he needed to say out loud to someone. "We're going to make it," Maya said, because the alternative is showing up with the Resolute and watching get disabled in the first 90 seconds while a Concord admiral writes instructive in his notes. She pulled up the bottleneck. The mesh isn't the problem. We're asking every drone to solve the whole battle space. They don't need to. They need to solve their local battle space and trust their neighbors with the rest. It took 11 days to rebuild the architecture around regional subswarms, clusters of roughly 200 drones each, semi-autonomous, reporting compressed summaries upward instead of raw data. The full mesh became a network of networks. Simulation 81's 11-second freeze became, in Simulation 140, a 60-millisecond hiccup nobody, but the logging software noticed. The first time the full 40,000-unit swarm executed a clean, coordinated engagement against a simulated capital ship target, the entire engineering bay went silent the way Maya had gone silent in that first briefing room. On the main display, the swarm didn't fight like a fleet. It fought like a single organism made of 40,000 tiny, expendable cells flowing around the target's shield arcs, finding the gaps a slower, dumber, singular intelligence could never have tracked fast enough to defend. Raphael, watching the readout, said quietly, "We built a hive mind. We built a counterargument," Maya said, "to every species that ever assumed bigger automatically means smarter." 6 days before the assessment squadron's scheduled arrival, A Concord trade vessel passing through the outer system filed a routine observation report after its sensors logged unusual fabrication activity across 3 continents. Within 40 hours, Admiral Threnn sent a private, almost amused message to Secretary Reyes. "We've noted significant shipbuilding activity. We assume this represents an attempt to field a more credible defense fleet. I want to be clear, and I say this with genuine goodwill, that scale of construction will not meaningfully change the assessment outcome. The Concord's combat doctrine has held for 9 centuries against every configuration a provisional species has attempted. We admire the effort. We did not expect it to matter." Reyes forwarded the message to Maya without comment. Maya read it twice, then did something she would later admit was probably unprofessional. She laughed once, sharp and humorless, and went back to calibrating Subswarm 7. The Concord squadron arrived on schedule. 3 cruisers, each 1.5 kilometers of gunmetal hull bristling with weapon emplacements that dwarfed anything humanity had ever fielded, moving into high Earth orbit with the unhurried confidence of an institution that had never once needed a hurry. Admiral Oren broadcast the formal assessment terms to the watching world. Standard non-lethal containment fields engaged on both sides. Engagement to last until one side's combat capacity was reduced below operational threshold. Observers from 4 neighboring trade-tier species present to verify the rating. Billions watched the live feed. Most of humanity expected to watch its own humiliation in real time. The Resolute held position at the front of humanity's formation, a single ship, visibly, deliberately alone, broadcasting nothing but a standard ready signal. Behind and below it, spread across nearly 900 kilometers of space in a formation that from any distance simply looked like sensor noise, 40,000 Hornet drones held silent station, engines cold, sensors passive, waiting. Admiral Oren's flagship hailed the Resolute directly. "We see one capital ship, and what appears to be debris or sensor clutter. Please confirm your full combat asset deployment." Captain Daniel Kessler, commanding the Resolute, allowed himself one small, private smile before responding. "Confirmed. Full deployment is active." A pause. The same 4-second Threnn pause humanity would later learn meant something close to confusion. Then, understood, assessment will commence in 2 minutes. In the command bunker beneath Geneva, Maya Okonkwo sat at a secondary console beside General Voss, hands steady on a control surface that, for the next several minutes, would matter more than anything she had built in 15 years of being mostly ignored. 2 minutes, Voss said quietly. "They're going to open on the Resolute." Maya said, "Capital ship doctrine. Kill the visible threat first, the moment they commit weapons to it. Every targeting system on those 3 cruisers locks onto a single large, stationary relative signature." She exhaled. That's when the sky goes black. The Concord's opening volley was, by every account Earth had ever gathered, restrained. A calibrated containment field strike meant to disable, not destroy. 3 pulses of focused energy converging on the Resolute's primary hull. Captain Kessler had 30 milliseconds of warning from a Hornet network's distributed sensors, more warning than his own ship's instruments alone could ever have provided. He used it to roll the Resolute 9 degrees, enough that 2 of the 3 pulses scraped shielding instead of striking true. It was the 3rd pulse, the one that connected, sending a shudder through the Resolute's hull and knocking out a third of her secondary systems, that Admiral Oren would later describe as the only moment the Concord's plan worked exactly as intended. It was also the moment 40,000 drones, which had been holding perfectly silent and perfectly cold for 6 minutes, lit their engines simultaneously. On the Concord bridge, sensor officers watched their displays fill, in under 2 seconds, with more individual contacts than any combat scenario in 9 centuries of doctrine had ever modeled for. The system, trained to classify and prioritize a battle space of dozens of large signatures, choked trying to individually track 40,000 small ones, exactly the bottleneck Maya had spent 11 weeks solving on her own side, now happening unsolved on theirs. The Hornet swarm didn't approach as a wall. It approached as water finds a crack, flowing around the cruiser's primary shield arcs, which have been engineered across centuries to deflect large, predictable, capital-grade weapons fire, and which had never once needed to account for 10,000 simultaneous plasma land strikes from 100 different vectors at once. Local engagement, Cluster 7 through 12, Maya said into the command channel, voice flat and fast. Converge on Cruiser 2's aft shield generator. It's the weakest arc. They built these for a one-on-one fight, not omnidirectional saturation. Aboard Admiral Oren's flagship, a tactical officer reported, with a particular strain of being encountering a problem his species had genuinely never faced, that shield integrity on the second cruiser had dropped to 40% in under 90 seconds, and continued to fall in increments too small and too numerous to individually counter. Target the largest concentration, Oren ordered, falling back on 9 centuries of doctrine built for exactly that instruction. It was the wrong instruction. There was no largest concentration. The swarm had no center to strike, no flagship to decapitate, no single point that, removed, would cause the rest to falter. Every cluster operated on local authority, rerouting around losses in under 100 milliseconds, the entire formation reflowing like a living thing every time the Concord's heavy weapons found and erased a piece of it. 11 minutes into the engagement, the second cruiser's containment field flickered and dropped, not from a single decisive blow, but from the accumulated weight of 9,000 small ones, each individually survivable, collectively unanswerable. Its weapons went dark. It drifted, disabled, exactly as the assessment term specified, crew unharmed, capacity reduced below operational threshold. The first cruiser fell 14 minutes later, in much the same way. It was the third, Admiral Oren's own flagship, that held longest, its captain finally abandoning fixed-position doctrine and attempting evasive maneuvers no Concord ship had needed to perform against a provisional species in living memory. For 90 seconds it worked, the cruiser weaving to the swarm's local engagement zones faster than the clusters could individually reconverge. Then Maya, watching the flagship's movement pattern from her console, said 5 words into the channel that General Voss would later call the cleanest tactical read of the entire engagement. They're herding toward Cluster 19. The flagship's evasive pattern, perfectly logical against any ship-based threat, was carrying it directly into the densest unengaged portion of the swarm, 190 drones holding silent reserve precisely because Maya's architecture had, days earlier, learned to predict exactly this kind of doctrine-driven movement and leave a trap waiting in its path. The flagship's containment field dropped 19 minutes and 40 seconds after the engagement began. 3 Concord cruisers, disabled, cruise alive, drifting in formation above an Earth that had not lost a single ship. The silence on the open channel afterward lasted, by the official transcript, 6 full seconds, long, even by Threnn standards. Then Admiral Threnn Concor's voice returned, and the practiced calm in it had been replaced by something far more careful. Assessment Squadron acknowledges combat capacity, reduced below operational threshold. Engagement concluded. A pause. Earth Defense Coordination. I would request, separate from the official record, to speak with whoever designed your tactical doctrine. In the Geneva command bunker. Every I turned to Maya Okonkwo, who had spent 10 years writing memos nobody read, and who sat very still for a moment before reaching for calm. This is Dr. Maya Okonkwo, she said. Sense of fusion led. Another pause, the kind that meant the being on the other end was recalibrating something fundamental. Doctor, your formation does not match any combat architecture in our 9th century record. May I ask what you call it? Maya glanced at Raphael, who was grinning the way a man grins when an insult has finally been turned all the way around. We call it the Hornet Directive, she said. You sent 3 ships expecting to rate us negligible. I'd ask you to reconsider the term. The official Concord rating, delivered 4 days later through proper channels, reclassified Sol System from Tier 3 provisional, unverified to Tier 2 provisional, verified, asymmetric combat capability, caution advised. It was by Concord standards the fastest tier advancement on record, and the first time in 9 centuries the word caution had appeared anywhere in an assessment of a species younger than the Concord's own written language. Admiral O'Wren's personal transmission arrived separately, addressed to Maya, unrecorded for the official archive. He said in the careful, recalibrating tone of someone rebuilding an assumption from the ground up that he had spent his career believing scale was destiny, that the species with the biggest ship always, eventually, won. He said Earth had taught him something his doctrine manuals never had, that a single mind, however large, is still only one mind, and an enemy that thinks with 40,000 of them at once does not lose simply because it is small. Maya read the message once, then went back to lab, because cluster coordination at 60,000 units was the next problem on her list, and the world, for the first time in her career, was finally listening. The footage of 3 Concord cruisers drifting disabled above an undamaged Earth spread the way footage like that always does, imperfectly, with details exaggerated and shaded in each retelling. But the part that never changed, the part that arrived intact at every retelling across every system humanity would eventually reach, was simple. They came to rate humanity negligible. They left having redefined the word.